Monday is a monthly series that we have with UAB Arts and Medicine, where we look at a variety of topics that affect our well-being, and we look at them through the lens of creativity and the arts. So that is what we're here for tonight. And just as a reminder, please feel free to, if you have any questions for our guests, put them in the chat box below, and then we'll get to those near the end of the session. Also, this is being recorded, so if you don't want your likeness on the recording, you can turn off your camera. And so September is National Recovery Month, and tonight's discussion will be in honor of everyone who has struggled with addiction personally or has witnessed a loved one suffer through this. We have 4 wonderful guests tonight, all who have very personal connections with addiction and recovery. Drew Callner, Leslie Reagan Playa, Demetrius Smith, and Tawny Stevens. And at this time, I'll turn it over to Drew.
Thanks, guys. Are we going to show the clip real quick, or?
You take the best part of everything you've ever done and put it in a syringe and then shoot it into your body real quick.
I mean, it took 3 seconds, and this is it. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And
the amount of brain damage I had done to myself, because that's what it is. You know, that's what prolonged heroin use does to you.
It's night and day. It literally looks like another person.
I have come to realize how much courage it has taken for him to want to be in recovery.
Every decision I made was made by her. And I prayed and I said, God, please, man, just take me or fix me.
Now it is an epidemic. We're losing kids every day. There's something on the news, or I
When you
hear.
have a fight, you got to decide. When one's brewing, you got to decide, am I in or am I out?
Hey guys, first of all, thank you for watching that. It's crazy to see that, because that was still the the best thing I've ever made as a filmmaker. That particular film I made, I started in 2015 and didn't actually finish it till around 2018. I started it in a halfway house. I'm in recovery myself for opiate addiction. It never intended to be something that was going to be premiered locally or distributed internationally or on any sort of grand scale. It was literally a way for me to touch back into a creative side. Something. I was coming out of addiction, really bad addiction. It was the 5th rehab. Sorry. It still gets me very emotional. So yeah, I was coming out of my 5th rehab, and I didn't really know who I was anymore. You know, mid-30s. Sorry, I don't normally watch the trailer. Haven't seen it in a while. But yeah, when I started this project, I was in my mid-30s, and I had spent about 2 decades singularly focused on opiates and destroying my life. And to jump back into filmmaking, something that was always a dream of mine, just seemed like a joke. I mean, a last-ditch effort, something I could just film on my phone or something. But what I had was I had a network of recovery and addicts that were now my friends, and I could tap into their story. Of course, the only way to really do that was to put my own. It took another life for itself. It sold out a private and public premiere in Birmingham. It got the cover of B Metro. It ended up going on to be sold and distributed Amazon and Google Play and iTunes. It was everything to me. It breathed life back into me. Since then, I've gone on to make a life out of filmmaking, and I kind of owe it all to that film. It wasn't easy though. One thing that film did that I always had an issue with was it put me on a pedestal as a recovery filmmaker, and I relapsed in the middle of that film. I relapsed shortly after that film, and that's recovery. That's what's real. Is even making a film about heroin addiction, I'm still very much in recovery, and we are never healed. One of the biggest things I wanted to focus on this film was hope. All the content pouring out into Netflix and the news was war stories, and I was seeing real hope in the 12 rooms of 12 steps, and I never gave up on that. I think people in recovery are the most courageous, powerful people I've ever met. And I mean that coming from, moving cross country, being a Marine Corps veteran, meeting all these people and all these different experiences. I mean that to the bottom of my heart. One of the biggest things about people in recovery is I don't know if they are always going to show you they need help, but they need that help. They need communication. They need support. Even if they tell you they're good, they need it. Love on them. Especially in this climate right now, it's so easy to just fade away. And, we're all stuck in our own heads with our own problems and our own loss of this and loss of that. But it's a really hard time right now for people in recovery. And that strength is, it's really hard to meditate. It's really hard. You have every reason in the world to throw it all down the drain. And so the ones that are staying in right now are getting an extra level of armor, so to speak. But at the same time, everything in recovery is completely fundamental. It's a 24-hour time period for the rest of your life. It's not really a defect of character. If anything, it's an absolute gift. all my relationships have been restored. My dreams of working in this career would have never been filled. Since this documentary, I've gone on to work major productions from HBO to Netflix to Hulu to everything, locally and around the South. I also own my own Callner Creates, my own video production company. But still, to this day, that trailer rocks me. I wasn't expecting that, so I apologize. Yeah, but I really appreciate everyone showing up. One of the biggest things I feel like we lose in recovery, once you kind of get the drugs out of you and you get to some sort of normal looking life, so to speak. You have a bank account, you have a car, you might have a girlfriend, you know, you're sober, the scars have healed, so to speak. It is service. And that's the only way this works, is to pass it on to the next person. Yeah, that is a principle of 12 steps, but it's not. It's a principle of life, is to basically give back what was so freely given to me. So that's where I'm at right now. And with COVID and with everything going on, me as a sponsor in the 12-step community has basically been non-existent, which is really hard, which is basically the fuel to recovery. I can read literature and make phone calls all day, but if I'm not helping another addict or alcoholic, then I'm just dying inside, and my disease is coming back full force. And when I say full force, I mean full force, instantly. You don't get to a plateau where you're easy breezy. You get to a plateau where life is good again, but you never get to a plateau where you can completely look away. And so events like this that, I can share my experience are everything. So thank you guys.
Thanks. Leslie?
God, Drew, you got me choked up. Oh, man. My name's Leslie Playa. Thanks for having me. So I am the director of the Recovery Resource Center located in Birmingham. It's a program of the Crisis Center, and we help connect individuals and families to substance use treatment and appropriate recovery referrals and resources. So a little bit about me. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I've worked in treatment for about 10 years now, and I'm also a person living in long-term recovery, which means that I haven't used substances since July 1st, 2007. So when I think about my story and I think about how I got here, one thing that I have to remind myself, and I remind everyone that I meet, especially when I give any sort of education, is just about the disease itself. And so addiction is a disease. There is an ample amount of evidence and studies that demonstrate that addiction is a disease. It's not some sort of moral failure. And when we look at addiction, we have three components to it. We have a biological component, psychological, and environmental. So biological is exactly how it sounds. So genetics, a predisposition, if you have parents or grandparents that had a substance use disorder. Then with psychological factors, you're looking at things like depression, anxiety, other mood disorders, ADHD, trauma, and then environmental factors. So it could be cultural or religious upbringing, if you've witnessed trauma, level of coping skills and education around coping skills, attitude towards therapy, something as simple as attitude towards feelings. So if you grew up in an atmosphere where you were told not to feel, keep secrets, don't tell the family's business, different things like that, that can affect how you build coping skills later. And I have all three of those things. So I kind of had the perfect cocktail, so to speak. for lack of a better word, for addiction. And so what I did was, my very first behavior was an eating disorder. That was before I ever picked up another substance. And I used it because I felt different. I felt like there was something wrong with me. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I was less than. And it took a long time for me to realize that I was trying to fill this void. And there really wasn't something that was wrong with me. There was just all of these things that had happened that contributed to where I was, today at that point. And this is really important because I think what people think of when they think of addiction is they think of somebody who is homeless or who is unstably housed in some way. They think automatically of the person that lives underneath the bridge, and that's not the case. It's people like me. It's people like Drew, Demetrius, and Tawny's family members. It's the people that were in the video. And the more that people understand that, I think the more that we can also embrace that recovery is possible. And sometimes it really took a lot for me to realize that I had a problem because I had it all together and I thought everything was okay. And I did not have it all together and everything was not okay. And so realizing that just because you don't fit this certain mold of what you think addiction is supposed to look like, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't pursue recovery. And luckily, I had some important people in my life that really helped me understand that, and it helped me get sober. And even through getting sober, it doesn't mean that life has been easy. As Drew said, this pandemic has been, I think, atrocious for everyone. But definitely for people in recovery and people who are trying to pursue recovery, anybody that's had any sort of mental health challenges, it's been very difficult because if we don't have access, then we don't know what to do in order to cope. And a lot of times we turn towards substances if we don't have other tools in place. And we see that a lot right now. We talked about this in our call a couple of days ago, but for those of you who don't know, especially in Jefferson County, but all across the nation, the overdose rates have gone up 30% at least. So that's something to think about. Now that doesn't even touch alcohol sales and what we're seeing with alcohol misuse and alcohol abuse. So there are many people right now that are using substances in order to cope with a really terrible situation. And so it's important that we talk about the fact that recovery is possible and that there are things that we can do even during the pandemic. So things like connection. Drew talked about the 12-step community. There's so many different support groups where people can log into Zoom meetings all across the country. I've done some online Zoom meetings with folks outside of Alabama. That's something that's keeping me sober and grounded right now. There's other resources that you can reach out to, like the crisis line with the crisis center. There's also a recovery crisis line that we have at the Recovery Resource Center. So there are things out there, but if you don't know about them, sometimes it's really difficult to find them. And even for those of us who do know about them, it can be difficult to access. But I'm glad that we are having this panel and showing awareness, because people may not realize that there is a bigger issue that they might have until somebody points it out. So that's all I got.
Thanks, Leslie. Demetrius.
Scoop. Hey, I'm Demetrius. Honestly, when it comes to recovery, I feel like I got kind of lucky because I got stopped by my CRC right before I was about to take my deeper end of the plunge. I started when I was about 16, sophomore year of high school, and continued on smoking and drinking, messing around with different prescriptions like promethazine and codeine until maybe my sophomore year of college. So 4 years in total. And even then, I still continued on a little bit, but just at a slower rate. I started out with harm reduction, to be honest. It wasn't even my choice. I was actually about to ramp it up before that. I had a friend who sold drugs on the side for no reason. Don't know why. He was like really well off. And that just goes to say it's like for this type of stuff, people's scenarios and settings really can't be any type of indicator because he was well off, nice car, family supported him, but he was selling drugs on the side just to make money for the fun of it. I was well off, family took care of me. So, from an outside perspective, I had no reason to start using. But as Leslie was saying, it's just like a whole bunch of different issues, that perfect cocktail. I was depressed, parents were making it no better, had a mom who seemed like she argued for sport, if that makes any sense. Uh, my dad's preferred way of teaching me to cope with things was to be quiet about it, wait for it to roll over. And so I picked up that as my own thing. I'd let my mom go off, and then later that night, I'd go out and just do what I needed to do to get stress off. And that turned into smoking and drinking every night that I could get out of the house. And in total, I'd say, especially during high school, that'd be maybe like twice throughout the week and then every day of the weekend, just about. Then in college, I, of course, had more time and room to do it. So for a minute, that went up as well. And then it just stopped working. And so I was about to go try something harder, something more experimental. But harm reduction kicked in. One of my friends, she was worried about me. And she was like, hey, I'm going to need you to slow it down. And it's so funny because I didn't even think about it at the time. But I sat there and negotiated with her about my use. Instead of just seeing it as a problem, I was like, all right, so you say not every other day. How about every 3 days? And this was an actual conversation that happened for about 30 minutes. And just like since I've been in recovery, after all this has finally stopped, because it was a rough ride, because having to stop recovery, it let me know that I was sort of blocking out a lot of different emotions, traumas, and just different things that I never really thought to process. So I'm pretty sure this makes sense, but initially stopping felt like I was making everything in my life more difficult and only making everything worse. Later on, when I was about at my year mark, I was so excited for that because I was like, all right, about to hit a year. Everything should magically change like a reset button. I should feel like a whole new person. And that wasn't how that worked either. It's been a slow process with me getting better each day, actually. Even though there are days where it's just like, I feel like I'm worse off than when I was using. And it's just, I got to recognize my growth throughout the whole process. I'm really thankful to the CRC I was able to join here at UAB because without them, I don't think I would have made it, to be honest. At the same time that I was actually starting harm reduction and starting to get into recovery, I was going through a really bad breakup in relationship. And so if it hadn't been for the people I had in my CRC constantly encouraging me and telling me about the fact that, hey, this is possible for you to do despite all of this, and having that place to like vent it all off, whether it be relationship stuff, school, life, parental stress, or just me wanting to use, because even now it's been a year and 3 or 4 months total. And it's like randomly I'll get that urge to want to go pick up and drink again or smoke again, or just a little voice in the back of my head telling me I'm weird because I don't do it. And it's just one of those things where it's like you got to keep letting yourself know and looking back at where you came from so that you are constantly reminded and pushing forward to keep doing better for yourself and not sort of stepping backwards. I picked up art as my hobby, sort of like fill up that empty space. And I don't know why I didn't think to do what Drew did and sort of like upload some of it. But even in this little office I'm sitting in now, there are pieces on the wall that I drew when I was first starting off just to like fill up something. And it's really become that hobby for me. And whenever I do feel like using or it got really bad, I just start drawing. And even though there's only 4 or 5 things in here that I've drawn, I have my whole apartment filled up. Oh, CRC is a collegiate recovery community. A lot of campuses are starting to have them just because they're acknowledging the fact that a lot of students do end up with addiction or different substance related problems. And this goes on past like just drugs and stuff. Some campuses, such as UA, they do food addictions as well, eating disorders. And that's what they're there for, to give like a sense of support and a place for students to feel like they can go and connect and share. They even, UAB specifically, they host different events for the CRC. Last year they did a sober tailgate for the CRC students. And there's a space that we have on campus for any UAB students near PETA Stop.
Thank you, Demetrius. Next we have Tani. Tani?
I'm muted. I did a whole thing, you guys. I did a whole thing where I said, trust me, you want to let me be in charge of my muting in case my son runs in and makes lots of noise, and then I didn't unmute myself. So welcome. So I am here. My story is different from the other people on this panel. I did not actually have an addiction or recovery story. My husband did. And we went through about 2.5 years of a downward spiral. And ultimately it ended up in him dying, which we can only gather from the autopsy report that it was from detoxing. So the reality is that when there is a family involved with someone who is struggling with alcoholism or addiction of any kind, that person is not the only person who is going through that experience. The reality is you are all suffering through alcoholism to some extent, and it destroyed our lives. And the problem with being the person who's, walking alongside it is you're completely out of control. You don't get to make any of the choices as much as you would like to. And your story is not the triumphant recovery story, especially if your loved one dies. You're just what's left. And so that kind of puts you in a position of saying, okay, well, what do I do with what's left? And that's sort of how my coaching practice, which is in its infancy, was born. And it is called Confident Scars Coaching, because it's somewhat like alcoholism was a fire, and it hit our house and it killed Mike, but it left me covered head to toe in scars. And I had to make the decision of how I would carry them into the world with me for the rest of my life. So I'm going to tell you a little story about that. We were in this roller coaster, this up and down, back and forth of sobriety and healing and trust, and then shame and lies and relapse. And it was tearing us apart. And Mike, on an upswing, had wanted to get a tattoo of his sobriety date. And I had always wanted a tattoo, but I didn't know what I was going to get. And I wanted to make sure it was exactly what I wanted before I put it on my body, blah, blah, blah. So once I figured out what it was going to be, we were going to go get these tattoos together. And I was sitting in church with him, and the priest read a verse from a poem called Jesus of the Scars. And the phrase was, "But to our wounds, only God's wounds can speak." And in that moment, I realized that Jesus was walking this with me. And that even when it felt like there was literally no one who could understand, not that we would let them, because no one was allowed into our shame bubble, but God had me. And he had a purpose for me, and he had a purpose for the scars that I was getting, because he had already dealt with scars of his own. Because that's the other thing with when you are family to and intimately connected to someone who is struggling with addiction is you're not perfect either. You're angry and you're failing and you're trying to make sense of it all and you're trying to hold it all together and you're trying to be the person that's like the bigger person, but your world is collapsing. And so there's just so much trauma and pain and, hurt that goes along with that. And then if you are as unfortunate as we were, then they die. And you don't even get the reconciliation or the sobriety story or the healing or the apologies. You don't get to do any of it. You're just left with the pain. You're left with the scars. And it was funny because I heard this speaker. I was listening to the podcast yesterday, trying to formulate what I wanted to say to you guys. And I was listening to this speaker named Eric Neuner. And he was talking about situations when he was a little kid and he had gotten bullied. And he was talking about now as an adult, learning how to embrace all of the parts of himself, even the things that were ugly and even the things that were hard to love and to embrace. And he specifically said that he wanted to embrace his anger that he had developed and held at that time in his life, because that anger had helped him survive. And that was the best he could do for survival at that time. And that resonated with me so much because not only had I been crazy angry at the time, but I even had a conversation with my best friend when I was in the thick of it all. And she said to me, I was out on a walk, and she said to me, just survive. Just survive. And I realized that anger had helped me survive. It didn't make me make the best choices, and it didn't make me the nicest person, but it helped me survive. But the other part of what Eric Neuner said was that sometimes the thing that helped us survive this traumatic experience is also the thing that we have to let go of in order to thrive in the new life we're creating. And so you can embrace it and you can thank it for how it served you. But ultimately, if you want to hit the next phase of your life, you're going to have to let it go. And so what the purpose is of coaching is for me to be able to create that space for somebody who's moved past the acceptance of the anger. They've dealt with it. They've processed it, hopefully with a good therapist. And for me to be able to come alongside them and say, okay, well, now that you've understood that doesn't serve you anymore, what do you want to do to thrive? Let's create that space. What are those choices for you? So those are kind of the two things. And I will also say that creatively, I don't get to do theater like I got to do theater. That went out the window when I had to provide for my family. And it wasn't something I wanted, but it's something that I've come to accept. But the creative outlet for me is speaking about this now. And the reason being, when I first started talking about Mike's alcoholism, it made people really uncomfortable. They didn't want to hear about it. They felt like I was just talking about, somebody who had passed in an unkind way. But the reality is, if you don't talk about it, then you affirm the shame that they felt in life. You are saying publicly, yes, they should have been ashamed of this, and now there's no healing that can come from it. And I'm just not going to do that. It may have been that Mike was someone who was fraught with shame. It may have been that he never would have been the kind of person who would have been able to talk about this, even if he had lived. But maybe that's why he was married to a loudmouth like me. And maybe that's why our paths got to cross, so that people would be able to learn from the experience that he went through and the trauma that we shared. Because I will affirm what the other three panelists have said, because sometimes maybe it's uncomfortable to say about yourself, but Mike was one of the best men I've ever met in my entire life. If you knew him, he was one of the kindest, most loving, most nurturing human beings. And if it can take him It can take you, and it can take your loved ones. And you must take it seriously if someone that you love is suffering. So I'm going to use my big loud mouth to spread that message for the rest of my life.
Thank you so much to all of you. I'm really amazed by your courage and your willingness to share your stories with us. So I really appreciate that. One thing that I wanted to touch on, we got to hear a little bit about creativity and how our guests have used creativity during kind of in their healing process and in general. But I was wondering if Leslie could speak a little bit more about that, because we hadn't heard from her.
Yeah. God, Tawny and Drew and Demetrius, like, oh, jeez. So, you know, I love what Tawny said about we use things that to survive. And for me, growing up, theater was the biggest thing that helped me survive, because it allowed me to be somebody else, because I was so uncomfortable in my skin. And so what was interesting is that when I've been doing theater my whole life, I did it in undergrad, and when I got sober, I didn't like acting as much because I realized how uncomfortable it was to be somebody else, because I finally got comfortable being in my own skin. And so being able to kind of flip that a little bit and find other ways to, you know, express my creativity, I found directing. Fun fact, I have directed Kimberly's husband in a show. So I love that part of expressing myself. And, you know, like Tawny was saying, it's been difficult to do theater in general. I have a young child, and now with COVID, it's been hard to kind of express myself creatively, but that's been something that has been kind of the through line of my story. And it was interesting to see how it shifted when I had to shift personally.
Thank you, Leslie. One question that I had, based on what a number of you had talked about a little bit, is, and I think this specifically, Demetrius touched on this, but I'm interested in hearing from all of you, when, you know, especially now in the pandemic, when you are struggling with sobriety and to stay sober, what are some of the things that you do for yourself to keep you going? Drew, I'll start with you.
Okay. So things I've done in the pandemic. Well, I've tried just about all of them. But something I've found recently, obviously, recovery-wise, I'm still active in 12 steps. We were doing Zoom meetings for a long time, and now we have opened back up to in-person meetings, which are night and day, absolutely night and day. To physically be, you know, outside around people, hearing their issues. You know, addiction is this overdeveloped sense of self. You know, I don't know where it came from. My mom didn't give it to me. My dad didn't give it to me, but I have it. So now I have to deal with it. So I'm constantly consumed in my head. So being around other people, just hearing any of their problems is so refreshing. But I also feel connected to them. But something creatively I've done is I've started a filmmakers group. And I basically reached out to all these filmmakers I knew, and it was out of need. It wasn't even, it's not even about the money anymore or the awards or anything. It was literally just out of the need of, I need to make films again, and I need to be around people. And so I got really vulnerable with that, and I just said it. And the response was great. All these guys that normally, you know, charge all this money and, you know, are very competitive, they needed it too. So we are in production, and just kind of working on that has been really, really big for me. So once again, it's like I needed community any way I could get it.
Thank you. Demetrius, will you talk a little bit more along that same line, just about what you're doing just to cope these days?
Honestly, for coping lately, it's been so many random things. Like this pandemic, when it first started, I never really imagined it'd last this long, for one. And then I also didn't think it really have that much of an effect because, at first you're thinking it's just masks and then maybe like some distance. It shouldn't be too much of like a bother on anything. But it's really been stacking up. It's had like a strong demotivating force all throughout. And it's only been getting worse, especially with all the other things that have been going on. And for me, I've just had to like pick up hobbies left and right. I've still been drawing, and that's been going pretty well. I always do an art class every semester since I picked it up, and this year I'm doing experiential drawing. So I just got done with a project for that. I started motorcycling this summer because it was something I've been wanting to do. And I was like, I may as well since everything else is sort of like shut down. So I picked up that, painted my bike on my own for whatever reason, and just like a variety of different things. Last week it got really hard again, and I was just like, I don't really feel like doing anything, so I've had to re-amp my workouts as well. Started doing 2-a-days, and it's just been like picking up different things that make me feel creative, like I'm being productive or producing things. Because if I can see what I'm doing, that at least reminds me that I'm doing something. Like if I go for a workout, I see that I'm sweaty at the end. I obviously just did that. If I sit at my table for like 2-3 hours drawing something and then I see what I just drew, I did that. And then same with like motorcycling. That bike is outside for me. I see that it's now darker than it was when I left. I've probably woken up some of my neighbors and I had some fun. So it's just been like trying to stack on things where I can see what I'm doing and sort of track that, hey, I'm still here, I'm still doing things. It hasn't put me on a full pause like I feel.
Thank you. Tani, what are you doing these days to cope?
Well, I get to cope with a lot of frustrated customers at Starbucks for my day job who would like to not wear masks or wait in lines. But so that's its own level. And honestly, just to be transparent, that is its own level of grief on top of it, because I didn't have to work before. So like my whole being for the past 3 years has been, if I wanted to stay in the mindset of I have to be here because that addiction forced me into having to go back to work, and then it would be a much more difficult place. And I'm very grateful that I don't live in that place anymore. So really everything outside of, work and family is a treat. And that was a big part of just going and enrolling in coaching school. It took me, I probably have looked back through 7 to 13 years worth of journals, and literally all of them have pointed to this. This has been a calling for years in my life that I kept trying to fill with theater. And I thought, because I wanted to be up and I wanted to be talking to people, and I kept thinking that now I was going to have to find something to fill my theater void. When in actuality, it was just putting a Band-Aid on what I was really supposed to be doing all along. But I don't think I could do what I was supposed to be doing until I went through the experiences that I went through. So, I'm very into, between work and coaching, I'm very into growth mindset versus fixed mindset right now. And the reality is that my creative brain is constantly seeking self-improvement. I feel creative when I am finding ways to make better choices, when I make a mistake and go, oh, great, I made a mistake. What did I learn from that? What can I improve there? How can I help somebody else with the experience that I just had with that? Like, I am so full with something that I didn't know I was neglecting for so long in my life. And so what I would say for people who feel creatively stagnant, what are you ignoring? What is creative that you don't even see as creative? What is the outlet that you have been waiting to fill that you didn't know could spark your fire? Because sometimes it's in the most unexpected places. So that's the encouragement that I would give to people is what else is there? Like, if you've always thought there was only this one thing, maybe it was just a distraction from the real thing.
Thanks, Tani. Leslie, do you have anything to add about things that you've been doing during the pandemic?
The biggest thing for me is just leaning on my support network of men and women who help keep me sober. That includes some women that I sponsor as part of my support program. I go to a lot of therapy. I'm a big fan of therapy, so that helps. But also, I've started writing a little bit again, and I think one of my favorite things that I do is my 2.5-year-old is now old enough that he starts kind of making up stories, and that has been the most fun to do that with him. So if he says like, "Mommy, there's a dinosaur over there," like we've got 15 minutes covered, and that's been really fun just to play, truly. And that can take me out of a bad day pretty quickly.
That's great. So we have about 9 minutes left, and I just wanted to, I think we've answered a few of the questions around creativity, and I know people wanted access to the Drew's Recovering Hope, and Drew put the YouTube link in the chats for everybody. But I just will also share some resources with people. But before that, I just wanted to see if for all of our guests, if there's just kind of something that you really just want to leave everybody with, as we're thinking about addiction and recovery, and particularly during the time of COVID.
If I can, I would like to say that it's like a work in progress. Everybody just has to try their best with it and just know that that is what you're doing. As long as you're doing that, then no one can really fault you for it, and you shouldn't be faulting yourself, which is something I frequently do. Even now, it's like, I don't know. It's just one of those habit things where it's just like as soon as you get done with something, just instantly beating yourself up for it, whether or not it went well or not. And also, I forgot, well, not forgot. I could not find like a UAB CRC flyer, but if anybody is interested in it or feels like they need it or know somebody who would, Googling UAB CRC should pull you up to the webpage. And there you'll have like the email to the director for it. She's really nice. And you should also have the building location on it too.
Great. Thank you, Demetrius. And yeah, just to reiterate, Lauren is keeping track of all these resources and suggestions. So please contact her if you want more information. Drew?
Hey, yeah, I guess I would just like to leave everyone with this, there's so much negative content out there being pumped in our heads and just naturally premeditating in our heads. We're all in this together, regardless if we're looking at each other on computer screens or if we're we're all holding hands next to a campfire. You know, like we're all in this together. And so please, you know, aside from this, reach out to me personally. If you have any questions or anything, I'm completely available, and I would probably love the human connections. So, but yeah, we're all in this together, and there is hope. If all the panelists are up here with everything we've gone through, that's completely transferable to your family member or whatever you're going through. So, thank you.
Tani, any parting thoughts?
Yes. So I just want to encourage people who recognize that a loved one might be struggling. I would say that if you see something that sends up red flags, you need to take that seriously. That I spent a very long time in denial, and I also spent a very long time hoping that he would just snap out of it, and that we could just not have to deal with it, and that it would get better on its own. And it wasn't until things were very bad that I was able to take it seriously. And what I would also say is, if you know that there are people who can help your loved one, you need to go ahead and reach out to them, even if it's going to make your loved one angry, even if it's going to increase their shame, because people came out of the woodwork to help our family after Mike passed. And I have to believe that if we had put that out for the people in our lives, there would have been support for him to get more help and more resources towards recovery. And if I could do anything differently, I would have reached out for more help. I would have let more people know. I would have shouted it as loud as I could have to let the people help us. So if you feel like, if you are unsettled and you feel like something is wrong, and you need to trust yourself.
Thanks, Tani. Leslie, last thoughts?
I just want to co-sign what everybody has said, and just to remind you that recovery is possible. It looks different. There are many pathways to recovery, but just to remember that, you know, you're not the exception. I think sometimes there's that feeling of like, well, they could get sober, but maybe I can't, or maybe my family member can't do this. And no, just please reach out. Please reach out. This is what helps us. This is what helps keep us sober, or keep us going, or keep us in recovery. So please, please, please reach out, because it's definitely possible, and it's happening. I mean, it's living proof. All of us. Tani, you're in recovery too. Like, don't ever discount that. So just remember that the shame is going to grow in the darkness, and we have to shine the light on it, or else we could regret it later.
Oh, thank you guys so much. Again, I so appreciate you guys being willing to share your stories. I can see from the chats that people are also really appreciative of your stories and your willingness to share. And it looks like we've got a lot of those resources in the chat. And again, just thank you all so much. And take care, and remember to connect with people, because that's clearly so important. Thank you.